We are here, and we thank Mr. Minister of Education and Research for accepting this invitation, because we have in front of us a generation of young researchers who want to communicate publicly about their research and are perhaps more prepared than others to do so. They also have ideas and proposals. For example, they suggested that there should be a day, just like there is in the Alternative Week, when researchers from those cities are invited to schools. A Researchers' Day, let's declare it and encourage it at the educational level. And because those who are watching us now are interested in science research and public perception. And I'll ask the first question, after which I'll give Mr. Minister the opportunity to answer, and then I'll let you continue. My first question is, how do you think you can support the presence of more young people in the audience? And do you think it's a good thing or not?
Good afternoon, everyone. I didn't know I was coming to a debate, but I'm glad to discover the interview from how do you want us to say it? It seems to me that we are living in a very complicated time. Because of technology, we have access to a lot of information, but many people confuse access to information with access to knowledge. And so basically we know we're talking about knowledge when we correctly assign a truth value to information. Assigning the truth value is done either by confronting the information yourself, if you have the skills and training, or sometimes otherwise. We can directly access knowledge through universities, academies, textbooks, and treatises. Because information is all around us and people interact with it. Often without having the critical apparatus, without having the appropriate educational level. What do we see? We see a surge of pseudo-knowledge. And the public space and social networks are actually dominated by pseudo-knowledge. We can also ask ourselves what to do about this. Well, one of the mechanisms is this: to return and reclaim the public space and the space on social networks. And we can only do this with people who want to do it. That's why, obviously, young people, and not just young people, all researchers, should return to the public space to reclaim that public space. It's pointless to stay on the sidelines thinking nothing will happen to you. That's nonsense. I have time for my lab, for my university, for my course. Pseudo-knowledge will eventually influence society. It will affect the institutions that protect you. Because society has protected, or society has created over time the institutions related to science, universities, academies, precisely to protect us from ourselves, to protect people from themselves. In the search for truth, the voice of the one who shouts the loudest, the voice of the most aggressive one, should not matter. If we're not careful about this, the institutions will fall, and they'll end up in your lab too. And at that point, you'll have to do more like pseudoscience, if you're going to do anything at all. That's why we need to step forward and defend and reclaim the public space. So there is room, and it needs to be there. Goodbye.
Thank you. And I'll also ask the second part of the question. Do you have directions, a plan, models, or examples to share?
I don't think you should wait for the minister. That's a big problem in this country, where everyone wants to talk to the minister. 3 million and something students want to talk to the minister, and over 200,000 teachers want to talk to the minister. They don't talk to each other, nor with the school principal, nor with the inspector, nor with the head of the lab. They have to talk to the minister. First of all, this has to be part of every researcher's ethos, to understand that they need to generate knowledge and bring that knowledge into society. When I say to bring it, I don't just mean the practical side, as you know, the applied research part. Of course, it has technological implications, and the practical implications, but I always say that fundamental research also has major practical implications, because they help you have a correct understanding of the world. They protect you. They are an antidote to pseudo-knowledge. We no longer end up believing that, I don't know, we can treat cancer. I've said in various contexts with Yarrow that our destiny is influenced by the conjunction of Mercury with Venus. But what does that mean? It means that even fundamental knowledge doesn't end up being put into articles, even if they're articles with many citations or in top journals. We need, in an interface language, to bring that knowledge into the public space. And it needs to be part of everyone's ethos. It's pointless for the ministry. I can give you many projects that the ministry started, some with Christian, where we are now trying to promote the most valuable ones. Once a month with a film about the story of the discovery. But it doesn't mean anything, and it will have almost no effect. If we don't manage to create a mass movement in the way I mentioned before, the researchers should return to the public space and reclaim it.
I was expecting you to ask me a question, Ada. I just want to thank all of you for being here. You were all wonderful. Everyone who presented, I would like to shake hands with each of you afterwards. You are amazing. What you're doing is beautiful, and I'd be glad if you kept it in your hearts. I have a question for Mr. Minister. He said everyone wants to talk to him, but now I have the chance.
That's the rule here. That's why I came.
Here I have the opportunity to ask him. Because he recently published a report about education and research, and there he says that universities have a mission to popularize science. In other words, it shouldn't just be us, those of us who naturally like to do this. Even if no one tells us, we still want to do it because it's so beautiful. But it's also part of the university's mission. That means help can come from there for everyone, including us. My question to Mr. Minister is as follows. How will it actually be implemented in universities so that they can carry out this mission of popularizing science?
As you know, universities have autonomy in their functioning. You can't interfere with them, tell them what to do and how to do it, and that's a very good thing. I'm a minister now, but when I was a rector, I wouldn't have wanted the minister telling me what to do at UBB, and I won't do that either. But I can say what suggestions or what things I promoted and did as rector. Look, for example, a few people realize that at this moment, we in universities are talking about what is called the university standard. And by law, the university standard means at least three important things. Namely, the education or teaching component, the research component, and the component of relationship with society. And then, depending on the university's profile, depending on how much that university wants to be connected to society, you can impose a standard for those who are employed at University X, a minimum percentage of, I don't know, 10, 20, 30%, it also depends on the field. For that connection with society, a connection with society, that means not just services to society. It also means knowledge transfer, both practical and theoretical knowledge transfer, which, as they said, give meaning and significance, becoming an antidote to manipulation and conspiracies. So the mechanisms are there. I invite all the rectors to use this approach because very often, especially in the old paradigm, people forget that they have the possibility of those three things. Most of them only had the education component in mind. Some later understood that somehow I like it, I don't like it. I also have to do research, but we also have the third mission, which is the relationship with society. At my suggestion, the higher education law changed the idea which had been in place for a long time. We used to have a teaching workload. It's no longer called a teaching workload, it's called a university workload, in which you have at least three components: teaching, research, and the connection with society. The money, when it arrives, covers all three missions. Of course, you assign different weights based on the program and your goals, but there's room for that connection. One thing that I think should encourage us to use it, and as I said, to once again become the reference point in the public space.
You are here in the middle of a group. Christian Presura is doing science communication with his own money. For a very long time, you have been in the middle of a group where the initiative is always private and there are people who want to do things. However, as you said, it can't just come from the ministry or only private initiative because it gets lost. A person comes, does communication, How do we change the norm that says the researchers should just stay in their place and not do anything else, which I think is a very strong norm? And that's why I was saying that we are addressing, first of all, young people, among those who have already reached a certain level, and they think it's not their job, and they don't encourage their students, PhD candidates, or younger colleagues to do it either.
First, having a private initiative is very good. And I wouldn't want the private initiative to say we're doing this just to become public, just so you understand me, right? I mean, I think there should be a public initiative, and in a normal society, besides public initiatives, you also have private ones that happen as long as there are funds. When there's no money, everyone knows you can't do it anymore due to lack of resources, but I still wouldn't see us living together. They have to go together. I can change things and they change. For example, in the evaluation indicators you use when assessing a researcher's activity, you also have the third component. Already in almost all classification, analysis, and evaluation systems, you have this component. The relationship with society, science communication, the part about how you contribute to open science. You started publishing in open source journals. So in other words, the mechanisms exist. They are also implemented at the European level. If you've applied to committees, you've seen these indicators are already in the national criteria. And moreover, as I was saying, there is the possibility for that university standard to strongly include this component. Furthermore, when you apply for diversity, for various grants as a principal investigator, you are asked beyond what publications you have, how many grants you have had, what citations you have, what your contribution to society was, what impact your research has had. And the impact gradually comes and is automatically linked to the communication component as well. And in the field of education, I'll tell you where we need to start, beyond the researcher's career. To successfully implement high school curriculum reform, fundamental changes are needed, as the current approach has been inadequate. Thank you for watching. In pre-university education, we transfer knowledge generated through research, and in higher education, we transfer knowledge and do research. Or if we transfer knowledge, we transfer the knowledge together with the way it is generated. That is, the student should learn not only the knowledge, but also how it was acquired. This model should be introduced into pre-university education, at least in high school. Kids get bored. Thanks for watching. It's no longer enough to just transfer knowledge to them. I have to transfer knowledge along with the way to generate knowledge. That means kids need to have access to laboratories. If they don't have laboratories in high school, universities should open up for them so they can see what's happening there. I can't add another week, so that's how it is. The teachers are upset with me. Because in the minds of many, with those two more atypical weeks, namely the Altfel week and the Green School, I'm ruining their educational process. And I always tell them that it should be done differently. I mean, it's not 2 weeks of break. Altfel week isn't just about trips, and Green School isn't only about visiting the botanical garden. The Altfel week can mean that based on the content you have, you do different activities, but still related to the curriculum. For example, why not invite some researchers to your class to explain to the children how the knowledge you've taught them in the last 2 or 3 lessons was generated? And at the Green School, you don't necessarily have to go for a walk in the forest. As I said, you could connect your content from all the subjects to the Sustainable Development Goals. And that's how you bring the content we have into the area of green and sustainability. So there are these mechanisms, the gates are open. You know, at one point we complained that we didn't have mechanisms. You should know that we do have mechanisms. We're already reaching the stage of form without substance. We need substance in these mechanisms because the mechanisms are there.
And what should happen for these mechanisms to work? Why or how do we do it? Young people should come so that young people can take over. And not only young people, but the young come and fill the positions that haven't been filled until now. Why are there so few
students, teachers,
researchers?
Do you notice this with young people entering the research field? And after the report that Christian Kuyx mentioned, I received a lot of questions from young people who want to enter research or higher education. Why am I opposed to permanent employment from STAR? I said I never stated I'm opposed, but told them something different. That right now, in higher education and research, we have two ways of entering: permanent employment and fixed-term employment. Now, a university or an institute rarely opens positions for young researchers or CS3 on a permanent basis because they're afraid, they don't know who the person is, how they're going to be. And usually they open the positions on a fixed-term basis, which creates an extra dose of stress for a young person. In 2 or 3 years, when the grant ends, what will I do? Where will I work? Maybe during that time, I got married, had a child, and Bruce finished the grant. After 3 years, I'll need to take another exam elsewhere. And then I propose something else as a mechanism which I hope will become widespread in the higher education system and in the research area. I would also like it in the area of teachers in pre-university education, namely that mechanism which we didn't invent, which works very well in the West, namely tenure track. The idea is that I open the position on an indefinite trajectory, so it's not permanent from the start, and then the heads of institutions are no longer afraid to open it. It's not for a fixed period either, in the sense that after 3 years it's over and you have to apply somewhere else or for another position. It's a position where, as you know, it depends on how you define 2 to 3 years. You are hired for a set term with yearly reviews, and after 3 years of good evaluations, you automatically switch to an indefinite contract. I think it's the best mechanism that protects both the person and the quality. That's what I would like to encourage as a new mechanism beyond the forms we already have in our higher education and research system. So in that sense, I was talking about tenure track. I wasn't thinking about the fact that I don't see why young people can't be hired on a permanent basis from the start. I mean, I see why, because I know it doesn't really happen anywhere in the world, and you know that too. But you also shouldn't keep them under constant stress with fixed-term contracts. I think tenure is best.
Before I ask you the next question, I'm going to ask the contestants if any of them have a question for Mr. Minister. Does he really have the chance now to be one of the 3 million? How many did he say, students, teachers, researchers, want to ask Mr. Minister a question? After that, think of a question if you want. I would like to make use of your quality as a psychologist to have you step out of your role as Mr. Minister. And in your capacity as a psychologist, because if you look at the young people here, they are researchers interested in science. And now at this age, they are very enthusiastic. I saw them in their presentations. But life comes, hardships come, family comes, children come. And it can happen that some of them lose their enthusiasm and maybe leave behind the dream they once had. So they can later popularize science. As a psychologist, what advice would you give? So that somehow they can follow, so they can keep this grit. I think that's what English calls the ability to keep going with enthusiasm for science.
First of all, a very clear selection from the beginning. Someone needs to say it, so I will. I'm also a researcher, not just a psychologist and minister. The career of a researcher is very difficult. If you don't have motivation, dedication, and tolerance for frustration, it's not easy to be a researcher. I'm not referring to the teaching staff who also do research, because when you're a teacher who also does research, your motivation for research tends to fade. If you haven't obtained some grants to fund your lab and PhD students, do you have teaching activities for students? And you don't end up stranded. In the research field, which is a very competitive area, that's the truth. Anyone who thinks it's like that, a unionized area where you get a permanent salary and the institution also gives you money to do whatever research you want, that model doesn't exist. You have to earn, at least in the beginning, your grants in order to have a salary. You have to win grants to have something to study. The competitions are tough as they are. The success rate definitely depends on the competition. But as you've seen in the country, it was around 10–15%, almost like the IRCs at the Commission. So the first thing is to ask yourself if you really want to do this. It's an interesting career because you're not just spreading knowledge generated by others, you're generating knowledge yourself. You have to enjoy this, have a high tolerance for frustration, and know that research will be a constant effort. You can't really take breaks unless you get sick or have kids. That's a different story. If you say, sir, I'm not really in the mood anymore, you've lost touch with the field and aren't competitive for future grants. So it's a lifestyle, and that's why I encourage you to think about whether you want it. I like it, and I think it's worth pursuing, but it's not easy. And the first thing is how you make this selection at the beginning, and if you want, how to keep your motivation. I think this part about research, about generating knowledge, about being creative, about being innovative, should become one of the values you have. I always say that a person has about 2 or 3 core values and then 5, 6, or 7 main ones. If research isn't among those 2 or 3 core values, it should at least be among the main ones. If it's missing, I suggest doing something else.
A notable Romanian woman is among the competitors.
And until we get to the competitors, in just a moment, Juliana, I have a question. Did you tell them it's hard? It's very
hard.
But also tell them something that will encourage them to want this.
The simple fact that you discover knowledge, that you push knowledge further, is an extraordinary thing for a person. You feel, in quotes, like a little creator, but at the same time you have to, like this thing. Not everyone is made for research, that's the truth. I want to tell you something else. It'll be easy and extraordinary. And after that, when you first find out that you didn't get the grant, what happens, and so on? But nobody told me that, I'm telling you now. But if you succeed, as he said, I forget who, you won't be held back by anyone. A wise man once said, if you do something you love, I mean for me, if it's part of your core or main values, you'll feel like you're never working. Life will be a constant fun.
I'll just add a little 20-second joke exactly to what you were saying. After my PhD, both my professor and wife were at the table and I didn't know who to sit beside. And professor told me very clearly, he said, Christy, he said, are you thinking about pursuing your career or your family? If you want to do research, you have to do both very well. If you don't do both very well, don't get into research.
You came in September to a conference in Iași at the Academy, and you talked about brain implants and about how they should be researched and developed in our research laboratories, because they already exist on less peaceful markets. And I think that most of the population would be against the idea of brain implants. Because it sounds like a very taboo thing, very dangerous. I mean, do you want to manipulate those things like that? And generally, these people close their doors when someone comes to them and says, okay, I want to tell you about some innovative research about how we can improve memory, attention, and so on. How would you respond to these people? How would you approach them? What would you explain to them? Because we have these kinds of discussions, including with our family, sometimes, and it would help a lot to know how to approach them so they wouldn't be so afraid of new technologies anymore.
Yes, I said it, and it was used in the election campaign afterwards by Mr. Georgescu, who said that I want to put implant chips in Romanians' minds and control them. So that's where we end up, you see, because we're not in the public space. Because there are people who are sensitive to such manipulations. Because at least since 2014 every year, we have 40 to 42% functional illiteracy in society. After high school, we end up here. I just turned back and explained. I had no problem. In any group I was in, whether it was a group of scientists, a more general population group, or even a very religious group, talking about these things, and if you speak appropriately, there are no problems. I always tell people that, you know, there's a joke in Transylvania where two friends, a Romanian and a Hungarian, are arguing. And at one point, he's really upset. The Romanian is upset. The Hungarian asks, what happened? He says, I found that you killed Mihai Viteazu, the Hungarian replies. But first of all, not us today. And that happened a long time ago, he says. But I just found out now, says the Romanian. But it's kind of the same with the chips. Now, let's be honest, these chips exist, neurocerebral implants exist. They're used for complex problems and severe disorders like epilepsy and severe forms of depression. So it's not really something new. Elon Musk, who was the idol of those who were against chips, so to speak, is actually working with chips, among other things. Yes, he has the study he's conducting and is trying out a new technology of this kind. And people need to be told that this is a technology. If you can't see well, you don't get an implant. You just use technology, which we now call glasses. When you can't hear well, you have another device that helps you correct this deficiency. When you have problems related to memory, work, attention, and so on, you can have another technology that corrects these deficiencies. Who wants to always? It must be clear that the approach is an ethical one which ensures people's safety, and it is one that does not create discrepancies, meaning some can afford the technology and others cannot, and we become even more polarized. And very importantly, it is one that will always rely on free will and social acceptability. Ultimately, it's up to the person to decide whether to use a new technology. And if you're honest, those who want good, those who don't and have questions, those who have questions, you try to explain to them and give them more explanations. I haven't felt any problems in these contexts, only that in our very politicized world, you see, it looks good to take an absolutely normal scientific matter and turn it into a discussion that scares people after that.
We also have questions from the audience.
There are
Questions from the audience. There are questions coming from online.
the audience might differ from this one, right?
Yes, it sounds good. I hear myself with an echo, okay. Which fields should be prioritized for research in the next 5 to 10 years? I would add a question of my own after reading the report you made public. Given that the illiteracy rate is rising and will continue to rise, how can we continue to supply research and development with scientists?
By correcting the illiteracy rate, by changing the curriculum. And if we make the curriculum as I proposed in terms of subjects, content, and teaching methods, we can correct this catastrophic rate, I would say, in 4 or 5 years. In education, change isn't instant, but it doesn't require generations either. We'll see positive effects in 4 or 5 years. What fields do I have? Everyone will surely tell you that the fields related to the fact that we are in the middle of an industrial revolution. Some talk about the fourth revolution, others even about the fifth, so everything related to technology, but in the logic of connecting people with technology. But at the same time, as someone who comes from the field of social sciences, I look at the world. As we develop new technologies and invest heavily, I see the social fabric breaking down, democratic institutions collapsing, and economic paradigms shifting. At the same time, we also need to invest in the social sciences so they can teach us what's happening to our civilization and the world we live in, and what the reorganization of democracy, the reorganization of the economy, and the reorganization of the social fabric will look like in the future. I always try to pay attention to what I'm looking at beyond what is established from the top down. That's important too, but I always keep an eye on it. At the areas where families are willing to pay for their children's education, in an institution that also has public education, because if a family is willing to pay money for a child to study in a certain field, they also have a sense of the world and the market, so to speak. And that there are chances that the child will find a job or adapt to the new world. There are several mechanisms, including top-down ones, set by strategies and market analyses, but I also consider bottom-up approaches to see what people are investing in and how people perceive this movement. Especially since, even if we are among scientists, as you know, there is this strong European movement of citizen science, which the idea is that ordinary citizens see science, they can and should be involved in science, of course, each at the appropriate level of competence. We can't say anyone can do scientific research, since that's not true. That still requires, as you well know, a lot of knowledge, a lot of effort, and it's not easy to be a scientist. But that doesn't mean that someone who isn't a researcher can't give input and can't participate in generating knowledge.
Thank you very much for being here. We know you have another commitment. I have a quick question at the end. How can we support you?
By supporting the report, for example. if there are good things there that you think are worth supporting, you really need to talk about them and support them. Because for so long we've been trying to make a correct diagnosis. Some hesitated, some focused on the negative, while others hid it and highlighted the positive. I made a diagnosis where I had no reason to emphasize the positive or to hide the negative. The mechanisms I proposed in the research area are ones I have personally observed. I am still an associate professor at Mount Sinai in New York. I see how things work there, and I always wonder why this can't work the same way here as well. So if there are things you resonate with, support them. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.